The atmosphere was electric, the kind of tension that only builds when two of America's most commanding figures share the same political stagia, one with the calm precision of a statesman, the other with the brashness of a showman. As Barack Obama took the podium, the crowd erupted, their cheers echoing through the packed venue. Cameras zoomed in, flashes sparked, and for a brief moment, time seemed to hold its breath. Then Obama began, his voice steady, confident, and deliberate, every word slicing through the noise with surgical precision. "Now, I've heard some folks lately," he began, pausing to let the murmurs settle, talking about how the system is rigged against them. Talking about witch hunts, conspiracies, and legal persecution. But when you're running your mouth about laws you clearly don't understand, when you're blaming everyone but yourself for your problems, that's not leadership. That's desperation. The crowd roared, and though he didn't name Donald Trump outright, everyone knew exactly who he was talking about. The former president had been making headlines daily, rants on social media, attacks on judges, lawyers, and journalists, framing himself as a victim of political prosecution. But Obama wasn't here to trade insults. He was here to teach. "Here's the thing about the law," Obama continued, his tone sharpening. "The law doesn't care about your ego. It doesn't bend because you shout louder than everyone else. It doesn't change because you want it to. It's based on principles, on facts, evidence, and accountability. That's what makes it strong. That's what keeps this country strong." Every sentence landed like a thunderclap. Trump's defenders had spent months crying foul, arguing that his indictments were politically motivated. But Obama's words framed the situation in a light that left no room for misunderstanding. This wasn't about politics. This was about the rule of law and Trump's glaring ignorance of it. "Now," Obama said, pacing slowly, his eyes scanning the crowd, "if you or I break the law, we don't get to call it unfair when the system holds us accountable. We don't get to play the victim when we're caught red-handed. That's not persecution, that's justice. And anyone who's ever sworn an oath to the Constitution ought to know that." The audience erupted again, their applause cutting through the tension. Somewhere backstage, cameras caught reactions from Trump supporters looking visibly uncomfortable. Obama wasn't shouting, he wasn't insulting, he was dismantling them methodically, intelligently, and publicly. "What I find most troubling," Obama continued, his tone lowering into a calm but cutting cadence, "is the way some leaders see people who've had every privilege, every opportunity, and now pretend they're being silenced. Folks, let me tell you something, no one who has millions of followers, their own news network, and the loudest megaphone in the country is being silenced. You're not being censored just because people are calling you out for lying." Laughter rippled through the crowd, but Obama didn't crack a smile. He was focused, serious. He was addressing not just Trump, but the entire culture of denial and deflection that had grown around him. "Leadership," he said, "isn't about avoiding responsibility. It's about facing it. It's about telling people the truth, even when it's not convenient. You can't lead a nation by pretending that every consequence is someone else's fault. You can't build credibility by attacking the very system you once swore to defend." Somewhere in the front row, an elderly veteran stood and saluted. Obama nodded in acknowledgement. His words weren't just political, they were moral. They spoke to a sense of integrity that many felt had been missing in public life for years. He paused again, letting silence fill the room. Then, with a wry half-smile, he added, "I know it's fashionable these days to say the system's broken. But the system isn't broken, it's just being tested. And when people try to bend it for their own gain, that's when we need to stand firm." Trump's name was still unspoken, but the air was thick with implication. The former president had spent years railing against institutions, the courts, prosecutors, the media, even his own military officials whenever they didn't serve his narrative. Obama's speech was an unflinching rebuttal, a reminder that respect for the law isn't optional, even for the powerful. "Now, I get it," Obama said, softening his tone slightly. "It's easy to feel frustrated when things don't go your way. But democracy isn't about getting your way all the time. It's about respecting the process, even when it challenges you. Because if the rules only apply when they benefit you, then there are no rules at all. The audience rose to their feet. Applause thundered through the hall. Obama stood there quietly for a moment, nodding, the image of composure. When the noise died down, he continued, "We've seen what happens when leaders treat the truth as optional. When they twist facts to suit their story. When they think loyalty to them matters more than loyalty to the Constitution. That's not patriotism. That's narcissism dressed up as nationalism." It was the kind of line that would replay across networks, quoted, clipped, and shared millions of times online. And as Obama spoke, his rhythm built so steady, forceful, unrelenting. "I spent 8 years in that office," he said, his hand gesturing to the invisible White House behind him. "I know it's not easy. You get criticized, you get second-guessed, and sometimes, yes, you get investigated. That's part of the job. But when that happens, you don't point fingers, say you cooperate, you respect the process, and you trust that justice will do its job. Because if you can't do that, you were never fit to lead in the first place." Every word seemed to strip away another layer of the myth Trump had built around himself. The myth of persecution, the illusion of victimhood. Obama wasn't attacking Trump's politics, he was exposing his ignorance of the law, the very thing Trump claimed to master. Obama leaned slightly into the microphone. "You can't say you love America while undermining the institutions that protect it. You can't demand loyalty from the justice system while dodging accountability. That's not how democracy works, that's how dictatorships start." Gasps and applause followed. The weight of his words settled heavily in the room. For many watching, it was more than just political theater, it was a reckoning. "Here's what I want people to remember," Obama said, his tone now soft but firm. "The law isn't supposed to protect the powerful. It's supposed to protect the people from the powerful. And when someone tries to convince you that the law is your enemy, ask yourself, oh, what are they trying to hide?" That line hung in the air like a bell toll. For years, Trump had painted himself as the ultimate victim of a corrupt establishment, railing against prosecutors, judges, and even juries. But Obama's words reframed the story entirely. Ignorance of the law wasn't a defense, it was a confession. Then came the moment that sent shockwaves across the internet. Obama leaned back, crossed his arms slightly, and said, almost casually, "When you've spent your whole life thinking money and fame can buy you out of consequences, reality hits hard. The law doesn't care about your followers, your rallies, or your slogans. It only cares about facts." The audience exploded. The cameras zoomed in. Obama didn't raise his voice, but his message was deafening. It was the silencing of noise by clarity, arrogance by intellect, ignorance by truth. As he spoke, clips of Trump's past interviews began surfacing online in parallel to his confusion over constitutional limits, his misstatements about presidential immunity, his public outbursts claiming absolute authority. Against the backdrop of Obama's calm, reasoned dismantling, it all looked painfully small. Obama pressed on. "If you want to lead, you have to learn. You have to listen. You have to respect knowledge, expertise, and truth. Otherwise, you're not letting you're performing. And government isn't a show. It's a responsibility to the people who put their trust in you." The room was silent again. Even those who disagreed with him couldn't deny the power of the words. This wasn't just a political speech, it was a masterclass in civics, delivered with the precision of a man who had walked through the fire of leadership and come out tempered, not burned. Obama concluded his remarks slowly, each phrase landing like a steady heartbeat. "In this country, no one is above the law. Not me. Not you. Not anyone. And if that simple truth ever stops being true, then we lose the very thing that makes America what it is." The final applause lasted several minutes. People stood, clapped, shouted his name, waved flags. But Barack Obama simply smiled, nodded, and walked off the stage. His message delivered, his opponent exposed, his point made. Trump, watching from afar, reportedly fumed. His team rushed to social media, trying to spin Obama's remarks as political theater. But the damage was done. Across networks, headlines read, "Obama silences Trump, exposes his legal ignorance in fiery speech." Clips of the speech went viral overnight, viewed millions of times, dissected by analysts, praised by legal scholars, and debated across talk shows. Obama's calm, as is his legal ignorance in fiery speech. Clips of the speech went viral overnight, viewed millions of times, dissected by analysts, praised by legal scholars, and debated across talk shows. Obama's calm, eloquent dissection of Trump's misunderstanding of the law had struck a chord, and not because it was partisan, but because it was true. And in that truth, something powerful happened. The noise faded. The bluster was quieted. The fog of deflection lifted, even if for just a moment. In that silence, one reality remained clear: Barack Obama hadn't just silenced Trump with words. He had done it with wisdom. The crowd's roar still hung in the air like thunder long after Darius Cole left the podium. His final words echoed through the grand hall, each sentence replaying in the minds of those who had witnessed it. No one had expected such a controlled demolition of a public persona, yet everyone knew they had just seen history being made. It wasn't just a speech, it was an unmasking. In living rooms across the country, televisions flickered with replay after replay. Cole's calm voice contrasted sharply against the erratic energy of Orion Grant, who just hours earlier had called his indictments an insult to freedom. The difference between the two men could not have been more pronounced, the one measured and factual, the other reactive and defiant. But even as applause still rattled the walls of the convention center, a different scene was unfolding miles away. Inside a gilded penthouse overlooking the city, Orion Grant stood in front of a wall of screens, watching the broadcast on mute. His reflection glared back at him from the glass, jaw tight, eyes burning with humiliation. The speech had gone viral before it even ended. Clips were everywhere, captions blazing across social media. Cole exposes Grant's legal ignorance. Darius Cole silences Orion Live. The law speaks louder than lies. Grant's aides hovered nervously near the doorway. No one dared speak. He slammed his fist onto the marble counter. He thinks he's smarter than me? He thinks he can stand there and lecture me about the law? He barked. One aide tried to interject, "Sir, maybe we can release a statement." Statement? Grant snapped, spinning around. "No, we're going live. Get the cameras ready. I'll show him who's ignorant." But for the first time, his voice carried something it hadn't before: an uncertainty. The kind that creeps in when someone who's always controlled the narrative suddenly finds themselves cornered by truth. Meanwhile, in the convention hall, Darius Cole sat backstage, surrounded by old colleagues and close friends. He wasn't smiling, though the energy around him was triumphant. It wasn't about him, he said quietly to his advisor, an old political strategist named Helena Price. It was about the country. About reminding people that laws matter even when they're inconvenient. Helena nodded. Still, she said, he needed to hear it. The whole country needed to hear it. Darius took a sip of water and exhaled. He won't stay quiet, he said. He never does. But sometimes, silence doesn't mean he stopped talking, it means people stopped listening. Outside, reporters clamored to get a word, lights flashing, microphones thrust forward. The words "speech of the decade" appeared on news banners within minutes. Editorials began pouring in. Legal scholars dissected Cole's arguments. Even those who had supported Grant begrudgingly admitted that Cole's speech had struck a nerve. That night, across television networks, panel discussions erupted. Analysts broke down every line of Cole's remarks, replaying key phrases with slow-motion emphasis. When he said, "You can't love a country while undermining its institutions," that was the dagger, one commentator said. That was the moment the room shifted. Others debated whether Cole had gone too far, whether it was appropriate for a former president to so publicly criticize another. But regardless of political leanings, no one could deny the impact. For the first time in months, the conversation had shifted from Grant's endless deflections to the meaning of accountability. Back at his residence, Grant's impromptu broadcast went live. The camera flickered on, revealing him behind a polished desk draped with his signature red and gold emblem. His tone was defiant, but his words stumbled over one another. People are saying that this man, Thiza, this former leader, can come out and attack me like that. But let me tell you something, nobody understands the law better than I do. Nobody. He leaned forward, pointing at the camera. The system is corrupt. They're twisting everything I've said, everything I've done. And this guy, Darius, he's pretending to be some moral savior? Please. He's part of the same machine trying to take me down. But the magic was gone. The performance fell flat. His voice, once commanding, now sounded strained, less like confidence and more like desperation. Online, reactions poured in almost immediately. Grant's meltdown after Cole's speech. Former president rattled, contradicts himself live. Public patience wearing thin. Memes flooded the internet within hours. Split-screen comparisons showed Cole's composed elegance against Grant's flustered rants. Hashtags trended worldwide. #silenced by Cole, #law over lies, #truth wins. In the days that followed, the speech became more than just a memento, it became a movement. College students quoted it in debates. Protesters painted lines from it on banners. Late-night hosts replayed it to laughter and applause. The legal community dissected it like scripture. And Darius Cole? He stayed mostly quiet. When asked for comment, he simply said, "I've said what needed to be said." Yet behind that calm exterior, he knew something profound had shifted. It wasn't about defeating Orion Granta, it was about exposing a sickness that had taken root in public life, the normalization of ignorance, the celebration of self-delusion. His words had struck deeper than politics. They had become a mirror. Meanwhile, inside Grant's world, chaos spread. His legal advisors argued among themselves. One warned, "Every time you speak, you make our case harder." Another pleaded, "Please stop posting online for a week, just 1 week." But Grant couldn't. Every insult from Cole replayed in his mind like a haunting melody he couldn't silence. He called news networks demanding interviews, shouting that he'd been misrepresented. The more he spoke, the worse it became. His rallies began to thin. The energy that once electrified arenas now felt forced. Even his loyal fans looked uneasy as he launched into incoherent tirades about conspiracies, judges, and imaginary enemies. The cracks were showing. In one particularly telling moment, during a live town hall, a young law student stood up and asked, "Mr. Grant, if you believe in the law, why not prove your innocence through the courts instead of attacking them?" Grant froze for half a second. Cameras caught the flicker of panic. Then he deflected, as always. "You wouldn't understand," he said, forcing a laugh. "The system's rigged, sweetheart." But that moment went viral too. Not because of what he said, but because of the look in his eyes of fear, not fury. Weeks passed, and Cole's speech continued to resonate. Schools analyzed it in civics classes. Newspapers reprinted excerpts alongside historical speeches about justice and democracy. A viral post from a retired judge read, "Cole reminded us tonight that the law is not a shield for power but a sword for truth." Public opinion began to shift. People who had once tuned out the noise began paying attention again. The word accountability became fashionable. Politicians were asked tougher questions. A quiet awakening was happening beneath the surface. One evening, as Darius walked through a quiet park near his home, an older man approached him. "Mr. Cole," he said, his voice shaking slightly, "I was never a fan of yours. Didn't vote for you. But that speech. It made me think. You were right. We've forgotten what respect for the law means." Cole smiled softly. "It's never too late to remember," he said. As the man walked away, Darius looked up at the fading sunset. The city skyline glowed in the distance, A mix of light and shadow, just like the country itself. Elsewhere, in a dimly lit office filled with half-empty glasses and stacks of paper, Orion Grant sat alone. The sound of his own voice echoed from a television replaying his last rally. He muted it. The silence that followed felt heavier than any criticism. For the first time, the noise that had always surrounded him was gone. No chants, no applause, no cameras flashing, just the quiet weight of his own reflection. And maybe, deep down, he realized what Darius Cole had meant. Maybe he finally understood that shouting about injustice isn't the same as seeking it. That ignorance, no matter how loudly it's defended, always folds under the weight of truth. The next morning, the headlines were merciless. Cole's speech marks turning point in political culture. Grant's empire of blame collapses. Editorials called it a moral reawakening and the end of the age of denial. But Cole himself stayed silent. When asked if he would respond to Grant's latest outburst, he smiled and said, "No need. The truth doesn't argue, it endures." And endure it did. Months later, the clip of his speech still circulated, now used in classrooms, leadership workshops, and documentaries. Its message had transcended politics. It had become a lesson in humility, in truth, in the strength of restraint. Some called it poetic justice. Others called it karma. But to the narrator of history, it was something simpler, the inevitable triumph of understanding over ignorance, of calm over chaos, of wisdom over noise. The man who once thought himself untouchable had been silenced not by volume, not by force, but by reason. And the man who spoke that truth never needed to raise his voice to be heard.